We distinguish between PubMed Central, Medline, and PubMed, and we searched PubMed for primary literature. Now, let's distinguish between the utility of PubMed, Google Scholar, and Google Search.
Now, what exactly is gray literature? So, for the most part, published medical literature includes primary and tertiary literature. So, primary literature includes, clinical trials, clinical studies, and tertiary literature that you can find, includes books and review articles. Published medical literature also includes editorials, commentaries, and letters to editors that are also published in journals. And you can access any of this published medical literature by using secondary resources such as PubMed and Google Scholar. And then there's gray literature that's basically not published in a book or journal. And so it's basically not published, so it's difficult to actually locate. And another thing about it is that it's not controlled by commercial publishing, so it's not as regulated. So, and it includes academic, business, governmental, organizational documents. And some examples include, so every organization, so for example, American Heart Association, Infectious Diseases Society of America, and other organizations like that, they have annual conferences where people, reveal their research and the results before they're actually published, and the abstracts and posters from these meetings become available before the results are actually published in journals. And that's important because that information could change practice, could change clinical practice, and you want to make sure that you get access to those before they're actually published, because publication process can take a long time. Another example is that hospitals are actually, they have their own protocols, and that's very important. So, if you end up working for an institution, you want to make sure that you have access to their protocols. Whether it's specific drug dosing or specific disease state management, you want to make sure that you follow the policies of your organization. And that's also considered gray literature because it's not published in journals. It's only available within the organization or within the institution. Another examples include, package insert, which is, provided by the drug manufacturer. There are also listservs, so you will come, depending on, whether you get specialized, there are usually listservs that you can, once you become a part of that community, you can actually communicate with other specialists in the field, and you can actually communicate as far as, drug dosing, how to approach disease state, etc. And that's also something that's not published, but it's important because typically when you have cases like that, it's because literature is not available in other places. So you're basically looking for information in order to help you give the best care to your patient, and that's also considered gray literature. And of course, governments like the CDC, publishes a lot of things that are not in necessarily in journals, uh, but they're useful and they're important and they're considered gray literature. So there are advantages and disadvantages of gray literature. So one advantage of using gray literature is that there are a lot of them, because people typically don't have to go through the rigorous process of peer review and publication process. You can actually get these done faster, so there are a lot more of them available. So the nice thing is that they can complement published literature, so they're not to replace them. But if there are gaps in the published literature, you can actually close the gap by using gray literature. And you can find cutting edge data. If somebody has in-house formulas for how to use specific formulation, that could be useful. Because people are not trying to publish for any benefits, there's decreased publication bias. Journals typically they decide whether they want to publish something or not, and that could lead to publication bias because the journal decided which articles they want to publish and which ones they do not. Whereas in gray literature, there is no such thing. You just publish it because you're doing it in-house in your institution, or if it's in the case of government, it's just their CDC website. And this could be current because you can do this pretty quickly. You can It can actually be more current because there's not a lag due to the process of publication, and it's low cost. There's no cost to publishing. And of course, disadvantages could be, peer review is important because if there are flaws or if there are errors or mistakes in that gray literature, that's a problem. You need peer review to catch those things. It could be disorganized since there's no publisher involved. There could be different formats. Sometimes they could be aligned with the mission uh, of organizations, so it could be misleading. And of course, currency is both advantage and disadvantage. At the same in the same way that it could be very up to date, they can also get outdated very quickly if someone is not constantly updating them. So where exactly can you find gray literature? So gray literature is typically not available by PubMed or Google Scholar. Sometimes they are, but usually they're not. So they can be found through specialty databases. So there are things like Web of Science or clinicaltrials.gov. So clinicaltrials.gov is really important because you can actually go and see if there's a clinical trial going on, which is not complete yet, but sometimes you can get information out of it, like inclusion, exclusion criteria, and dosing, until the study is actually completed and it's published. And sometimes the studies are completed and not published, and you can still get information about them in clinicaltrials.gov. And then there are institutional repositories. So for Loma Linda, you can actually, there are guidelines that are set up, and every institution has their own repository. I'm just using Loma Linda University Health as an example. So if you go to one portal, so under apps, if you go under guidelines, you can see all these in-house gray literature for Loma Linda. So as an example, let's say adult inpatient orgatro ban guideline. So here's a PDF. So it tells you the purpose, objectives, procedures, eligible patients. It has, let's see, algorithms on how to dose. I know this is not published in any journals, but it's important literature because if you are managing patients at Loma Linda, then you can use this to guide you. And of course, if you can always use search engines like Google to actually locate these institution. I'm sorry, these great literature.